This is a new ministry which is just starting. Reverend Hood needs your help in sharing the good news of Jesus Christ and His power throughout the world. If you would be so kind as to send a donation to Nicholas Hood III Ministries of any amount, Reverend Hood will send you a free complimentary copy of his book of original personal prayers and beautiful photographs entitled The Test, The Strength, The Endurance, and The Way Out. We appreciate your support, and in this way, you can partner with Reverend Hood in sharing the good news of Jesus throughout the world. Please make your check out to Nicholas Hood III Ministries and mail it to 4535 Chrysler Drive, Detroit, Michigan, 48201.
You know why I really love Nick Hood as a minister? I watched his father do it, and he took over for the church, and he was one of us, but he really turned out to be a great minister. I know it's hard, and that's something that I know that all ministers may not be doing what they're doing because for the right reasons, but I know it's hard. I know he's a beautiful man, and we've been knowing each other for over 50 years. I believe in him. He's inspired me in so many ways to do what I'm doing and try to be the best at it. Make sure you watch Nick Hood's Ministries. You'll never be the same.
Welcome to Nicholas Hood III Ministries, a ministry of hope, spiritual inspiration, personal power guided by Christian love. May the power of God's Holy Spirit fall upon you as you sit back and enjoy today's program. I introduce you now to Pastor Nicholas Hood III.
Today I want to talk about Daniel in the lion's den. Daniel in the lion's den. I'm sure many of us looking at this program today are familiar with that story, but it's kind of funny to me because when I was 41, I was elected to the Detroit City Council. I was still pastoring a church. My father, who had been on the Detroit City Council for, it seemed like forever, was counseling me about how to run for office. And he said, Nick, he said, sometimes you're going to be around people who don't support you, and you're going to have to go into the lion's den. And I said, Dad, I'm going to tell you something. He said, what's that? I said, if I go in the lion's den, I plan to come out on my own 2 feet, standing tall, and the heart of the lion is going to be bloody, and it's going to be still pumping, and it's going to be in my hand, and I'm going to squeeze it as I walk out of the lion's den. And my dad made a face. He looked like he was getting sick to his stomach. But, we started talking about that, and what my dad was really saying was, there are times in life when the odds are just stacked against you. There will be times in your life when there's so many people, so many folk who are so powerful, who are ganged up against you, that it'll seem like you're surrounded by lions. And he said, and in that moment, what my dad told me was, he said, just be quiet. I was younger then, and I kind of laugh about his reaction. But what I want to talk about today is the heart of the lion. And I want you to think about my image, what I told my dad, that I was going to take the heart of the lion out, and I was going to squeeze it, and and it would still be bloody, and I was going to walk out victorious. And my dad was just horrified at that. But as I have given thought to Daniel in the lion's den, I think it's a lot deeper than that. I think my first reaction, the reaction I gave my father in my younger years, is more informed now. I've asked myself, how is it Daniel survived in a den of lions? Number one, how did Daniel get into the lion's den? He gets into the lion's den because simply he's doing well. The Bible tells us in chapter 6 of the book of Daniel that Daniel is one of there were 120 people called satraps, and they were like little governors. And guess what country they were governors in? Ancient Persia. And what country today emanated from ancient Persia? It's Iran. Now think about that. The Jews were a minority then. You don't hear about it in the news now. You know, the United States has bombed Iran and all that. But actually, during the Babylonian captivity, the Babylonian exile of the Jews, guess who liberated the Jews? It was Iran, ancient Persia. So much so that, you know, I visited Israel 3 times. In the Knesset, that's the Jewish parliament, in the Knesset, they list all the kings of Israel. And there's one abnormality in that list. And guess who it is? It's a king named Cyrus. And guess where Cyrus came from? Cyrus was not a Jew. Cyrus was from Persia. And in the Bible, when he liberated the Jews from Babylon, he had such a mighty army that he was called Cyrus the Cylinder, because he rolled over everybody in his sight. And frankly, that's part of the reason why the modern Iranians have not given up the fight. And because they're a very proud people. They remember when they ruled the world. But Daniel, during his time, is considered, he was one of 3 presidents over these 120 provincial leaders called satraps. And Darius, who is the king of Persia, is trying to figure out who he's going to give authority to. And the Bible tells us that Daniel excelled over all of them. And Darius, the king, was all set to make Daniel really in charge of everybody. And what happened was the other 2 presidents who were on Daniel's level, the 3 of them were being observed by the king. The other 2 ganged up on Daniel, and they just set a trap for him. And they set a trap. Without going too deep into the story, you can read it for yourself. But basically, they talked to the king privately, and they said, we think that there ought to be a rule that anybody who does not worship the king should be thrown into a den of lions. And they caught Daniel praying to God, the God that you and I worship, God known as Yahweh, Elohim. The God of Jesus Christ. And they threw him into a den of lions. And Darius, who is the king, is heartbroken because he really loved Daniel. He respected Daniel. He wanted to promote Daniel. But Daniel's detractors set him up. And so Daniel is thrown into a den of lions. The Bible paints such a poignant picture of this. As he's being led to the lion's den, Darius the king is outside, and he is just grieving that his prized worker, his prized protege in Daniel is now being fed to the lions. And so Darius waits there all night long. And in the morning, they open up the lion's den to see what has happened to Daniel. And to their surprise, Daniel walks out like a natural man. And the king says, Daniel, how did you survive the lion's den? And he tells the king, he says, God shut the mouth of the lions. He said, God shut the mouth of the lions. And from that point, he promotes Daniel, and Daniel has a wonderful history there in Persia. So I want to come back to my dad. You know, my dad told me, he said, sometimes you're going to go into the lion's den if you're going to be in politics, and you had to be prepared for that. And so I've been asking myself, how did Daniel survive in the lion's den? Number one, he survived in the lion's den for the same reason why Darius, the king, promoted him. The Bible tells us that Daniel had a good spirit. He had an excellent spirit in him. And because he had an excellent spirit in him, Darius, the king, saw promise in Daniel. And I think that when Daniel was thrown into the lion's den, guess who else saw the spirit of Daniel? It was the lions. You know, animals are interesting. Animals can sense fear. Animals, even though they may not talk English and may not fully understand English, they can sense fear. They can sense compassion. It's an amazing thing. I said this a couple of weeks ago on this program, that I've been around some animals, some dogs that look fearsome. I've got the dogs next door, 3 pit bulls, and the owner told me, he said, my dogs are vicious, and he's smiling. And I said, well, your dogs may be vicious, but they get miraculously quiet when I whistle around them. And I said, and my goal in life, every time I pull up in my car, is to start whistling. Because if those dogs ever jump the fence, I want to be able to whistle. And I want them to know that I'm the guy who's whistling to them. And when I do that, those dogs get real quiet. And because I think the dogs sense that I'm trying to communicate with them. And between you and me, I just hope if they ever come across the fence that they will remember that I'm the guy who's tried to befriend them. But I think those lions in the lion's den knew, they could sense an excellent spirit in Daniel. Number 2, the Bible doesn't tell us this, but I have a feeling that because Daniel was praying before going into the lion's den, he probably went into the lion's den praying too. And people, poo-poo. Some people poo-poo prayer, but prayer makes a difference. And I believe that God heard the prayers of Daniel in the lion's den. And part of that spirit that Daniel had was a spirit of love. Very often, when we become in an adversarial situation, when we are cast into an adversarial situation, the human reaction is to fight back. If somebody curses at you, you want to curse back at them. If somebody lashes out at you, the human reaction is to defend yourself and to lash back at them. But one of the things that we saw excellently in Martin Luther King Jr. is in the face of the ugliness and meanness during the civil rights era, Martin Luther King, very much to the consternation of some of his detractors, he said, it's either nonviolence or non-existence. And taking that attitude, Dr. King said, we are not going to fight back, but we're going to pray. And in the process of the segregationists, seeing children praying, seeing elderly people praying, singing songs of praise, and down on their knees, it brought the nation to its knees. And in a sense, that civil rights era was kind of like Daniel in the lion's den. With overwhelming odds, they walked out with the heart of the lion. And in your personal situation, I don't know what you're going through, but you might want to think about that if you're living in a tough environment, maybe with a man or a woman who's mean to you, maybe at work where people are ganging up on you, think about Daniel in the lion's den. And I believe you can come out of the lion's den with the heart of the lion in your hand, not by squeezing it, not by wrestling with the lion, but through love. That's what we learn in Jesus Christ. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. I have a couple of young people who are guests with me today. They're young ministers. And we'll be right back. I want to introduce them to you, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the heart of the lion. Stick around, I'll be right back.
There are people all across this globe who now will have the opportunity to know you like I do, because of course you are very forthcoming in telling stories about life, stories that are relatable, and that means something. How wonderful it is, and I just look forward to seeing how this platform, this new platform, will just rise and grow and really be a vessel through which you can be a blessing to folk all over this world, and Lord knows we need it.
Thanks so much for being with me. And today I have two young ministers. They're students for the ministry. Both of them have asked me to intern with me this summer. And so I thought I'd invite them to our taping for this week, just so that they could get the sense of, the fullness of what I do as a minister. We have Dr. Kristen Barnes Holliday, and we also have Reverend DeAndre Nelson. And I've known both of these individuals. I've known both of you for a long time, even though you're young. And just for the audience's sake, could you share with us just briefly, Kristen, what has led you to the ministry? I know you're a PhD in education. I was there when you defended your dissertation. But what has led you to the ministry?
Okay, this is layered, but I'll make it quick. So at 10 years old is when I believe I was initially called to go into the ministry. I was at a Methodist church on the west side of Detroit with my parents. We were visiting the church. The lights were beaming somewhat like these lights are beaming, and I was like lifting my hand up into the lighting. And so my mom kept asking me, was I okay? She finally got my attention. I told her I was fine. It wasn't until maybe close to 2 decades later, a good 20 years for sure later, that I realized it was in that moment the Holy Spirit was really speaking to me. And I felt called to go into the ministry, but I could not articulate that at just 10 years old. And from there, now almost 4 years ago, I made the decision to go to seminary at the final deadline. And here I am in ministry, all because of a calling.
All right, and DeAndre Nelson, you're an ordained minister, even though you're young, ordained in the Church of God in Christ. What has led you to the ministry at this time of your life?
Certainly. Well, I as well felt a call and felt the hand of God on my life, even from my youth. Even at the tender age of 14 years old, I preached my trial sermon, Reverend Hood.
I was there.
Yeah, I was going to say, you were actually there, praying for me and rooting me on. And in that, I've matured and continued to grow in the faith and in my study. And like Kristen, I too myself am in seminary, and I felt it necessary that if God has gifted you, and which I believe God has called me to, I believe we have a responsibility to hone and to rehearse, if you will, our gift. And so that's really a part of how I have continued to grow in the ministry, and then have decided to go into the realm of seminary.
DeAndre, you heard me talk about Daniel in the lion's den, and I'm just curious, from your perspective, what are your thoughts about the heart of the lion, and how did Daniel get out of that lion's den alive? What's your first reaction to that?
Yeah, I thought when you said something that I thought really struck a chord in me when you talked about Daniel's spirit. And even you gave the example there as it relates to how animals even can pick up on our spirit and on our temperament. And so that really struck a chord with me and really spoke to me in a way that, we should always be aware of how our spirit is when we're entering into a room, when we're dealing with people, and so that our spirit is really shining the light of Christ in whatever we're doing. And so I think in looking at the story of Daniel, I think that's an excellent portrayal of that, and how it's interesting, though, that his his spirit got him into the position that he was in the lion's den, but also it's that same spirit that got him out of it. And so it brings to mind the scripture, all things are working together for the good of them who love the Lord. And so that really did stick out to me.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
Kristen, how about you? What are your thoughts about Daniel in the lion's den?
When you were talking about Daniel in the lion's den, one of the things I thought about is when you said Persia, historically, is now
amazing?
Modern day Iran, and
They were the
I said-
supporters of Israel.
I said, how
early on.
ironic, because I believe that contemporarily Iran represents, up until recently maybe, resiliency. And I made the connection too with Daniel. I think Daniel could be classified as one who was resilient in the Bible as well. And so it's weird how the historic and the contemporary can intersect in that way. And so I think it shows, just like you just said, a lot about, Daniel's heart and, someone who persevered and was hopeful, and even when his faith was tested, continued to push through. And so I think that was great.
Have either of you ever been in a situation where you felt outnumbered, outgunned, outmanned, outwomaned? Similar to being in a lion's den, where people were really not supportive of you, really wanted to hurt you, bring you down. And could you imagine employing any of those spiritual gifts that Daniel had to get you onto safe ground? I realize both of you are young, but have you ever been in that kind of situation?
Yeah, I can speak to personally, just in professionally, in work environment, dealing with previously a situation where I was essentially being outcast and having to deal with some internal conflict issues. And when it rose up to the top and my name was brought up, it was brought up, well, he's, I know who he is. He's very a mild-mannered guy, his temperament. And so it reminded me again, going back to the story of Daniel, that it was remembered of me, my temperament and kind of who the person I was and my spirit, having that sweet spirit or calm, mild spirit allowed, like I said, me to persevere through that situation and come out when really the odds were stacked against me, and there were some other kind of powerful people who were really opposing me at the time.
Mm-hmm. But it turned out okay for you?
It did. It actually turned out better than okay in that I received a promotion. And so I definitely came out on the winning side of that.
Kristen, how about you? Have you ever been around jealous people who just didn't like you?
Yeah. I feel like what's life without that? I think that that's part of life, but I specifically remember a period in time when I was in my PhD program, and I wasn't viewed so favorably by everyone at one point, and I didn't know what to do. I thought I was going to be, kicked out of the program, and I went and I met with this woman who ended up becoming the chair of my dissertation committee, and I told her about what I was experiencing, and I asked her to be an ally. I asked for her help, and I don't know what she did, but she helped me, and I graduated out of that program. She took me on as an advisee, and to this day, we still have a relationship. And so sometimes, when you're in situations like that, and confined within those types of boxes, expectedly or unexpectedly, you need someone who has a powerful voice, who can speak out on your behalf. And I let my work speak for itself. I kept my mouth closed.
It's difficult when you're around people who just don't like you. Mm-hmm. I got an interesting telephone call last week from one of my former divinity school students. We were classmates together. He's a little ahead of me. And almost from the very beginning when, we met, he started calling me names. And I thought it was peculiar. I said, here I am at the Yale Divinity School. I said, I've survived public education in Detroit, and I'm with a guy who's calling me names. And the names he called me, he would call me Paul. I said, why do you call me Paul? He said, because you're nice to the white people. And I said, you don't even know me. You know, and he kept calling me names. And then finally, he said, I'm going to call you Nikki Nice. I said, why you do that? He said, because you're nice to people. And then, and to the audience, I hope you will understand what I'm getting ready to say now. But when the guy called me Nikki Nice, I went to the ghetto with him. I said, it's funny you should call me Nikki Nice. I said, that's what your girlfriend called me last night. And the guy looked at me, but that's a Detroit thing, you know, which was, I said, well, let me see what kind of man you are. You know, you calling me out of my name. I said, I'm calling you something. Now, let me see, are we going to fight? I said, what are you going to, and he backed down. And so the guy called me, had a nice conversation last week, and I told him some stories, and I told him, I said, by the way, I used to direct the Yale Gospel Choir. He said, you did that? I said, if you hadn't been in such a hurry to call me names, you would have known I was the director of the choir. I said, where were you? Now, I'm confessing that, I'm talking about the heart of the lion, me talking about the guy's girlfriend, that wasn't nice. But that was me trying to take the heart of the lion by just squeezing it, But really, what I learned from the Daniel and the Lion's Den story is that Daniel, I think he overwhelmed the lions with love. I think we're about out of time. We're going to have to stop this, but I hope the two of you can stick around with me for next week. And I want to ask you a few more questions about the ministry, what you're hoping to do, and then I want to get your reflections on my little sermons. Is that fair?
That's fair.
Thank you so much. And to the audience, thank you for watching. I appreciate your support. I've been getting wonderful phone calls and wonderful letters, and I look forward to seeing you next week. And remember, I'm praying for you. God bless.
This is a new ministry which is just starting. Reverend Hood needs your help in sharing the good news of Jesus Christ and his power throughout the world. If you would be so kind as to send a donation to Nicholas Hood III Ministries of any amount, Reverend Hood will send you a free complimentary copy of his book of original personal prayers and beautiful photographs entitled The Test, The Strength, The Endurance, and The Way Out. We appreciate your support, and in this way, you can partner with Reverend Hood in sharing the good news of Jesus throughout the world. Please make your check out to Nicholas Hood III Ministries and mail it to 4535 Chrysler Drive, Detroit, Michigan, 48201.